Nathan Carter, a wealthy and self-assured businessman, was no stranger to victory. Whether in business or life, Nathan thrived on competition and had built an empire on his relentless drive. One evening at an opulent Manhattan soiree, his closest friend Ryan issued a challenge that would turn Nathan's world upside down. With a sly grin, Ryan leaned in and said, "Nathan, let's see if you're really as bold as you claim to be. I dare you to marry someone completely unlike your usual type." Nathan, known for his penchant for dating stunning and glamorous women, raised an eyebrow, intrigued but slightly offended. "And what's in it for me?" he asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Ryan, ever the instigator, raised his champagne glass with a mischievous smile. $1 million if you pull it off. The catch? You have to marry her and stay married for at least 6 months. Nathan's competitive spirit kicked in. A challenge? A prize? It was irresistible. Without hesitation, he nodded. "You're on," he said confidently, already envisioning another victory. The woman Ryan had in mind was Sophia Bennett, a far cry from the models and socialites Nathan usually pursued. Sophia didn't conform to traditional beauty standards, but what she lacked in appearance by Nathan's shallow criteria, she more than made up for with her self-assurance, intelligence, and independence. To Nathan, this was just another business deal, a challenge he was determined to win. A few days later, Nathan received more details about Sophia. She was a woman of conviction, someone who charted her own path and wasn't afraid to stand her ground. Nathan, used to controlling every situation, was intrigued. How would he handle someone who wouldn't bend to his will? Their first meeting was arranged at an upscale restaurant. Nathan, ever the image of confidence, arrived early, but when Sophia walked in, she immediately commanded his attention. She moved through the room with an air of calm self-possession, completely unfazed by the lavish surroundings, or by Nathan himself. "You must be Nathan Carter," Sophia said as she sat down, her tone even and direct. "And you must be Sophia Bennett," Nathan replied smoothly, extending a hand. Her handshake was firm, her gaze steady, a subtle declaration that she wouldn't be intimidated. Sophia didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Let's not play games," she said, her voice sharp but composed. "I know why we're here. I know about the bet, the terms, and the conditions." Nathan's smile faltered for a moment, though he quickly recovered. "And yet, here you are," he said, intrigued by her forthrightness. "Why?" Sophia paused, studying him carefully. "Let's just say I have my reasons," she replied. "I'm not naive, Nathan. 6 months might sound short, but a lot can happen in that time. If you think you can control or manipulate me, you're mistaken." For the first time in years, Nathan felt unsettled. He wasn't used to being challenged so openly, and it both irritated and fascinated him. Sophia's self-assurance was unlike anything he had encountered before. As their meeting ended, Nathan couldn't stop thinking about her. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met, and he realized that this bet might not be as straightforward as he initially thought. Days later, their second meeting took place. Not at a high-end restaurant, but at a modest cafe. Sophia had chosen the spot, and Nathan, curious, agreed. He wanted to understand her motivations. When he arrived, Sophia was already there, sipping tea and wearing a calm, unshakable smile. She greeted him warmly, her tone less sharp than during their first encounter, but still brimming with quiet confidence. Nathan, ever the strategist, began to wonder if this woman, so different from his usual conquests, might be the first real challenge he'd faced in a long time. "I thought you preferred fine dining," Sophia quipped, as Nathan settled into his chair at the modest cafe. "Sometimes breaking the routine is refreshing," Nathan replied, trying to project ease despite feeling slightly out of his depth in such an unassuming setting. Their initial small talk was polite, a dance of surface-level details exchanged with practiced civility. But Sophia, true to her direct nature, wasted no time cutting to the chase. "If we're really going through with this," she said, setting her teacup down with a deliberate motion, "I want to make one thing crystal clear. I'm not interested in your money or your luxury lifestyle. 6 months is 6 months, and when it's over, I'll walk away exactly as I came." Nathan studied her, impressed by her candor. It was evident she wasn't like anyone he'd met before. While others might have seen this arrangement as a shortcut to wealth and status, Sophia seemed to regard it as nothing more than a means to an end. "So what do you want?" Nathan asked, his curiosity genuine. "Freedom," Sophia replied without hesitation. "Even though we're agreeing to this arrangement, I won't be controlled by you. My life is my own, and that's not going to change because of a temporary marriage." Nathan couldn't help but smile. It wasn't the answer he'd expected, but it didn't bother him. To him, this was a game to win, and if Sophia wanted to maintain her independence, it wasn't a hurdle in his eyes. "Fine," Nathan agreed smoothly. 6 months? And then we part ways." Sophia regarded him for a moment, her steady gaze assessing whether he truly meant his words. She had entered this agreement with her own motives and intended to ensure that nothing derailed her plans. Deep down, she suspected Nathan might try to manipulate her, but she trusted her own strength to stand firm against his influence. Their meeting ended amicably, with both parties leaving clear on their roles. Sophia would maintain her independence, and Nathan would treat the marriage as a mere formality, a step toward winning the bet. As the days passed and the wedding date loomed closer, Nathan began to realize that this game might not be as straightforward as he had envisioned. The wedding itself was a cold, perfunctory event, more of a transaction than a celebration. Nathan Carter, ever the strategist, already envisioned himself victorious. 6 months was nothing, and he was confident that Sophia, no matter how determined, would eventually succumb to the allure of his world. After the ceremony, Nathan brought Sophia to his sprawling penthouse in the heart of Manhattan. It was a testament to his immense wealth, with its towering glass windows offering a panoramic view of the city, and an interior adorned with the finest furnishings money could buy. To Nathan, this was the battleground where he would triumph. He believed that the sheer power of his material world would overwhelm Sophia, breaking down her walls and winning her over. But from the moment she stepped into the penthouse, Sophia made it abundantly clear she wasn't impressed. Her demeanor was distant, her expression one of defiance rather than admiration. 6 months, Nathan. Not a day more, she stated firmly as she walked toward one of the massive windows, her gaze fixed on the city lights with disinterest. Nathan smirked, unshaken. He was accustomed to resistance in the beginning. Every woman he had encountered had eventually bent to his charm and the allure of his wealth. In his mind, Sophia would be no different. But as he stood watching her, a seed of doubt began to form. For the first time, Nathan wondered if he had underestimated the challenge that Sophia Bennett posed. Nathan believed Sophia would be no different from anyone else. He had always managed to win people over with his wealth and charm, so he confidently assumed she'd eventually fall in line. In the days following their wedding, Nathan spared no effort in trying to impress her. He lavished her with extravagant jewelry, designer clothing, and invitations to luxurious trips, all with the expectation that she'd gradually embrace the life he dictated. But to his growing frustration, Sophia rejected everything. "I don't need these things, Nathan," she would say with a serene firmness that made his temper simmer. Her calm refusal to be swayed by material possessions only deepened his irritation. Sophia clung to her simple, grounded lifestyle, refusing to be consumed by the trappings of his opulent world. For Nathan, who had always gotten what he wanted, this was a challenge he hadn't anticipated. And it wasn't just about the bet anymore. Her defiance felt like a personal affront to his authority, a bruise to his ego that demanded correction. He resolved to win her over, not just to claim victory in the bet, but to prove he was in control. Nathan shifted his tactics, growing more aggressive in his approach. He insisted that Sophia stop going to work, offering shallow justifications like, "You don't need the money anymore," or "Your role as my wife is more important." When she resisted, he made her schedules unbearable, manipulating her time to create obstacles and delays for meetings she cared about. Sophia, however, stood resolute. Every attempt Nathan made to assert dominance was met with her unwavering resolve. It wasn't just a battle of wills, it was a test of dignity, and Sophia was determined not to lose herself in the process. Their relationship began to feel like a battlefield. Small provocations escalated into tense, charged moments. Nathan's attempts to corner her with cutting remarks were met with sharp retorts that dismantled his control. One evening, as the tension reached a boiling point, Nathan tried a new angle, an emotional appeal. "I don't understand you, Sophia," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. Any other woman would be thrilled to live like this. The luxury, the comfort, it would be enough for anyone. But for you, it's like none of it matters. What do you really want? Sophia, who had been quiet up until that moment, slowly raised her eyes. They sparkled with an intensity that made Nathan falter. What do I want? She repeated, her tone measured but charged with meaning. I want respect, Nathan. I'm not a pawn in your game. You think you can control me with money? But you're wrong. Dignity, integrity, those aren't for sale. You might have all these things around you, but inside, you're empty, and that terrifies you. Her words landed like a blow Nathan hadn't seen coming. For the first time, he felt something he hadn't expected. Fear. Sophia wasn't just resisting him. She was pulling back the curtain on the hollow existence he'd built for himself. It was unsettling in a way he couldn't fully process. But instead of retreating, Nathan doubled down. Determined to reassert control, he began to isolate Sophia, cutting off her connections and sabotaging opportunities that could advance her career. He even went as far as derailing important events she'd meticulously planned. Yet no matter how hard he pushed, Sophia stood firm. Every obstacle only seemed to strengthen her resolve. She refused to let Nathan reshape her identity or take away her self-respect. Then one evening, as Nathan tried to corner her once more, Sophia turned the tables. You think you're in control, don't you? She said, her voice calm but laced with calculated intent. Nathan froze, taken aback by her composed defiance. But here's the thing, Nathan, Sophia continued, stepping closer. I have a plan too, and when the time comes, you'll see. This whole game is bigger than you ever imagined. Her words left Nathan reeling. For the first time, he began to question whether he was truly the one calling the shots. For the first time, Nathan began to question if he had underestimated Sophia. A creeping fear settled in, fear that he might not come out as the victor in this game. Each passing week felt like a taut wire, growing tighter and more fragile, ready to snap at any moment. Nathan, consumed by his obsession with control, tried every possible tactic to manipulate the situation in his favor. Yet Sophia met every move with unyielding resistance, her inner strength more impenetrable than he could have imagined. She was a fortress he couldn't breach, and his constant efforts only seemed to solidify her resolve. As time went on, Nathan found himself unable to ignore something that unsettled him deeply. His view of Sophia was changing. What began as grudging respect for her resilience transformed into something far more complex. For the first time, a woman was disarming him emotionally, and it left him confused and vulnerable. One night, after yet another heated argument, Nathan sat alone in the cavernous living room of his penthouse. He stared at the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass windows. This view, which once symbolized power and triumph, now felt hollow. A gnawing emptiness settled in his chest. Why did he feel this way? Sophia was just a woman he'd married to win a bet, a pawn in his game. She should have been nothing more than a temporary obstacle, yet here she was, stirring emotions he couldn't explain. For someone who prided himself on control, this newfound vulnerability was unsettling. Meanwhile, Sophia carried on with her life, her demeanor distant and composed. She seemed almost indifferent, as if she were waiting for something Nathan couldn't quite grasp. It was as though an invisible wall stood between them, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break through. Nathan didn't know whether it was pride or the fear of losing control, but Sophia's presence had begun to affect him in ways he never imagined. You're different, Nathan, Ryan remarked one evening over dinner. It was Ryan, after all, who had proposed the bet. Normally you'd have wrapped this up by now, but it seems like this one is throwing you off balance. Nathan forced a smile, though his unease was evident. He hated to admit it, but Ryan was right. Sophia was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, and it was becoming clear that she was affecting him in ways he couldn't ignore. That night, determined to regain control, Nathan returned home with a plan to settle things once and for all. He needed to remind himself that this marriage was just a contract, nothing more. When he walked into the penthouse, he found Sophia sitting on the couch, her focus entirely on the book in her hands. She appeared so calm, so unaffected by the tension that had been building between them. Can we talk? Nathan asked, breaking the silence that had become the norm between them. Sophia glanced up, closed her book with deliberate ease, and looked at him with a serene but piercing gaze. "Of course," she replied, as if she had been expecting this moment. Nathan sat across from her, his mind racing to find the right words. The atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension, and he knew he couldn't approach this conversation with the same calculated detachment he had used before. "What are we doing here, Sophia?" he asked, his voice laced with a sincerity that even surprised him. "This started as a game, a bet, but now, I don't know what to think anymore." Sophia held his gaze for several moments, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but weighted with significance. "I'm not playing games with you, Nathan. I never was," Sophia said, her tone steady and calm, but her words carried an undeniable weight. "From the start, I accepted this arrangement for reasons that go far beyond you. I don't care about your wealth or your attempts to control everything around you. I'm here for something bigger, and if you haven't realized that yet, maybe it's time you did." Nathan felt a tightness in his chest. Her words hit him harder than he expected, as if she was hinting at a truth he couldn't yet grasp. Frustration bubbled up inside him, fueling his growing sense of powerlessness. "I know you're keeping something from me, Sophia," he said, his voice edged with irritation. "But what gets under my skin is how the more I try to figure you out, the more I feel like I'm the one losing control. And I hate that." Unable to stay seated, Nathan abruptly stood, pacing across the room in an attempt to release the mounting tension. Sophia remained composed, her eyes following his movements with quiet intensity. Then she rose from her chair, her movements deliberate and graceful, and approached him, stopping just inches away. Nathan's heart raced as she looked up at him. "Nathan," she began softly, her voice carrying a weight that made him stand still. "This isn't about control. You've spent your life trying to dominate everyone and everything around you. But with me, you'll have to learn that control isn't always the answer. Sometimes, things just need to be what they are." For the first time, Nathan truly looked at Sophia, not as a pawn in his game, but as a person, complex and whole. "So what do you want?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. Sophia's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile that sent a chill down his spine. "I want you to figure that out for yourself, Nathan." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with his swirling thoughts. In the days that followed, the distance between them grew wider, yet paradoxically, Nathan felt closer to her than ever before. He became obsessed with uncovering Sophia's secrets, desperate to understand her true intentions. But with every effort, he felt himself slipping further from the control he once prided himself on. Sophia was shifting the very foundation of his world, and it terrified him. As the end of their 6-month agreement loomed, Nathan found himself plagued by sleepless nights. The sense that he was on the brink of a life-altering revelation consumed him. Sophia was no longer just the woman he had married for a bet. She had become an enigma, someone who held answers he couldn't reach. Desperate for clarity, Nathan resorted to every resource at his disposal. He hired private investigators, dug into her past, and followed every lead. Yet no matter how deep he delved, everything seemed carefully crafted to deflect his search. It was as if Sophia had anticipated his every move, always staying 2 steps ahead. One evening, after a particularly grueling business meeting, Nathan returned to the penthouse later than usual. He noticed the soft glow of the balcony light spilling into the darkened living room. Through the glass doors, he saw Sophia seated, gazing out over the sprawling city like a queen surveying her domain. Nathan's pulse quickened. Tonight, he felt, was the moment he'd been waiting for. She was ready to tell him the truth, or so he hoped. Yet the thought of what she might reveal made his throat tighten. Steeling himself, he walked toward her. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the stillness of the room, growing louder with each step. As he neared the balcony, Sophia didn't turn, her gaze steady on the cityscape before her. Nathan paused, unsure if he was prepared for what lay ahead, but knowing he had no choice but to face it. Sophia didn't turn around right away. The air between them felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if they both sensed that something monumental was about to unravel. "I need answers, Sophia," Nathan said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded violently in his chest. "I can't keep doing this. You need to tell me the truth." With a deep sigh, Sophia rose from her chair and slowly turned to face him. Her eyes, usually calm and inscrutable, now glimmered with a fierce intensity Nathan couldn't decipher. There was something dark, something raw in her expression that unsettled him. "The truth?" she said with a bitter smile, crossing her arms as if bracing herself. "Do you really want to know, Nathan?" He nodded firmly, his determination unwavering despite the mounting tension. He thought he was prepared for anything, but the words that followed would shake him to his core. "You have no idea who I am," Sophia began, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You've always seen people as pawns in your game, Nathan, but this time, you were the pawn. I've been playing this game from the start." A cold shiver coursed through Nathan's body. The confidence he always held in his control over situations was crumbling right before her piercing gaze. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sophia pressed on, not allowing him a word. "Do you remember the name Bennett?" she continued, her voice growing sharper, fueled by anger and pain. "Of course you don't. People like you never remember. My father owned a small company, one that struggled to survive until you came along and destroyed it." Nathan staggered back a step, his mind scrambling to piece together her words. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice laced with confusion. Sophia took a deliberate step toward him, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and grief. "My father, Nathan. He was an honest man, doing his best to support our family. And you took everything from him. You ruined him, Nathan. He lost everything because of you, and it led to his death." Her voice broke for a moment, tears pooling in her eyes. Still, she pressed forward, her resolve unshaken. "My father killed himself because of what you did. Your empire, your so-called success, came at the cost of his life." Nathan froze, the weight of her words crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Memories he had long buried began surfacing. Deal after deal, contract after contract, the countless lives affected by his ambition. He couldn't remember every small business he had crushed in his climb to the top, but now the consequences stood before him, personified in Sophia's anguish. "Sophia, He tried to speak, his voice trembling with desperation, but she raised a hand, silencing him. "No," she said sharply, her voice trembling with unspent rage. "You have no idea what you've done. This isn't about money, Nathan. It's about lives. You took my father from me, the only person I had. While you thrived, my mother and I were left in ruins. We sank into debt, despair. You lived in luxury, while we could barely survive." Nathan's chest tightened with guilt and shame. He wanted to defend himself, to apologize, but no words came. He simply stood there, motionless, as the enormity of his actions weighed down on him like an unbearable burden. "I planned everything," Sophia continued, her tone steady now, but no less filled with resentment. "When I found out about your bet, I saw my chance. I approached you deliberately. I accepted your challenge because I wanted you to feel what it's like to be used, manipulated, and left powerless. I wanted you to know what it's like to lose." Nathan's legs felt weak as he tried to process her revelation. He had always believed he was the one in control, the one destined to emerge victorious. But now, standing in the wake of Sophia's truth, he realized the tables had turned. He wasn't the player. He was the piece she had been moving all along. He was the target now, and Sophia was the one pulling the strings. The realization hit Nathan like a tidal wave. He wasn't in control, and she had been the true player all along. I didn't know," Nathan stammered, his voice trembling with desperation. "I didn't know you were." "No," Sophia interrupted, stepping closer until their faces were inches apart. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made him flinch. "You didn't know because you didn't care. You destroyed lives, Nathan, without a second thought. And now, I'm not here to ruin you. I'm here to make sure you never forget what you've done. I want you to feel the pain you caused, and believe me, that pain will stay with you for the rest of your life." Her words landed with the weight of a sentence. For the first time, Nathan was confronted with the real consequences of his actions. The guilt crushed him, heavier than anything he had ever felt before. He wasn't just losing a bet, he was losing pieces of himself he could never get back. Sophia stepped away, her expression unreadable, and the silence that followed echoed through the penthouse like a hollow drumbeat. Nathan's legs buckled, and he collapsed onto the couch, unable to process what had just unfolded. Words failed him. All he could feel was an all-encompassing emptiness. Her revelation churned through his mind like an unrelenting storm, dismantling the life he thought he knew. The woman he had dismissed as a mere piece in his game had just turned the entire board upside down. For the first time, Nathan didn't know what to do. He was truly, utterly out of control. Sophia didn't give him time to process the truth. After revealing the destruction his actions had wrought on her family and her life, she left him alone, abandoning him to drown in his guilt. Nathan sat motionless in the suffocating stillness of the penthouse, the walls of his once impenetrable world seeming to close in on him. He wanted to call out to her, to beg for forgiveness, to explain the inexplicable, but no words came. How could he justify something so monstrous? How could he erase the pain he had caused? In the days that followed, Sophia did what Nathan feared most. She completely ignored him. Her presence became a haunting reminder of his failure. She walked past him as though he didn't exist, her indifference cutting deeper than any words of anger could. At breakfast, she sat in silence, barely glancing in his direction. When Nathan tried to speak, his words faltered under the weight of the unbreakable wall she had built between them. For a man who was used to commanding attention, to being the center of every room, this was unbearable. Sophia's silence wasn't just ignoring him. It was dismantling the very essence of who he thought he was. She spoke to the staff, handled her affairs, and carried on as if Nathan were nothing more than a shadow in his own home. The absence of acknowledgement gnawed at him, slowly dismantling the arrogant, self-assured man he had always been. One morning, as Sophia prepared to leave the penthouse, Nathan couldn't take it anymore. "Sophia," he called out as she adjusted her coat near the door. "We need to talk." She paused, her back still turned to him. The air between them grew heavier, and Nathan waited, desperate for some kind of reaction. Anger, frustration, anything. But Sophia said nothing. She walked out, gently closing the door behind her, leaving Nathan alone, with the echo of that soft click reverberating in his mind. The pain of being ignored by Sophia, someone he had begun to see as far more than an adversary, was a foreign and crushing experience for Nathan. He had always been the one in control, the one who won every game. But now he was the one being manipulated, punished by her silence and disdain. It was a torment unlike any he had faced before, and for the first time, Nathan Carter realized he was losing not only the game, but also himself. Every time Sophia left Nathan standing alone, the crushing weight of his powerlessness grew heavier. And that was just the beginning. Sophia didn't stop with silence. She began undermining Nathan's confidence in small, calculated ways that were impossible to ignore. At work, he noticed important meetings being rescheduled without explanation. His decisions, once rarely questioned, suddenly came under scrutiny, and projects he had initiated inexplicably started to fall apart. Nathan knew this was Sophia's doing, even though she never openly admitted it. He could feel her influence, subtle yet relentless, like she was pulling the invisible threads that kept his life intact. At home, things were even worse. Sophia maintained a deliberate air of disdain, distancing herself from every one of Nathan's attempts to reconcile. She stopped sitting with him at meals, avoided meaningful conversation, and limited her words to impersonal exchanges. Whenever Nathan tried to fix things, following her from room to room, Sophia would respond with an icy glare that made him feel like an intruder in his own home. Her silence wasn't passive, it was deliberate, a weapon she wielded with precision. One evening, Nathan found Sophia sitting in the living room, engrossed in a book. The scene appeared peaceful, but he knew better. That calm exterior was a trap, a storm waiting to be unleashed. He cautiously sat on the couch across from her, his voice low and almost pleading. "Sophia," he began, "I know I've done terrible things. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever say. But can't we try to work this out? Can't we at least talk?" Sophia slowly closed her book, not looking at him immediately. When she finally raised her gaze, the coldness in her eyes sent a shiver through him. "Talk?" she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You think there's anything left to say? You want words, Nathan? After everything you've done, words are meaningless." "I was wrong, Sophia. I know that," Nathan insisted, his voice rising as he leaned forward. He was desperate for a connection, any sign that she might relent. "I'll do anything to fix what I've done. I can change. I swear I can." Sophia stood slowly, her movements deliberate, and looked down at him with a piercing gaze that made Nathan feel small, as though her stare could see through every hollow promise. "Change?" she said, her voice sharp but calm. "Do you really think changing now will undo everything? Will it bring my father back? Will it erase the years of suffering you caused?" "No, Nathan, it won't." She stepped closer, and Nathan felt the weight of her presence bearing down on him. "What you do now," she continued, her tone cutting like ice, "isn't for me, it's for you. You'll carry this guilt, this pain for the rest of your life." Nathan stood frozen, the reality of her words sinking in. For the first time, he truly understood that there would be no easy redemption, no instant forgiveness. He wanted to fight for something, anything, that could be repaired. But Sophia was far beyond simple repair. In the days that followed, Sophia intensified her quiet punishments. Every passing glance was filled with disdain, every word laced with cold indifference or biting sarcasm. Nathan's frustration began to spiral into desperation. He tried everything to show her that he was changing, that he wanted to be better. But no matter what he did, Sophia's response was always the same, dismissive, as though his efforts were futile. One night, after a catastrophic day at work, where one of his most important projects had been inexplicably sabotaged, Nathan returned home feeling defeated. As he entered the penthouse, he heard Sophia laughing on the phone. He stopped in his tracks, listening to fragments of her conversation. It didn't take long for him to piece together what she was discussing. His work. She was talking about decisions he had made, ones that had led to the day's failures. A knot tightened in Nathan's stomach. He knew it was her. Sophia was dismantling everything he had built, piece by piece, but in such a calculated, subtle way that no one but him could see it. And she made him endure it in silence. When Sophia finally hung up the phone, Nathan was standing in the doorway, his face pale with frustration and betrayal. Nathan waited in the living room, his eyes fixed on Sophia as she entered. His expression was a mix of exhaustion, repressed anger, and unmistakable pain. "You're tearing everything apart, aren't you?" he said, his voice low but laced with frustration. "At work, here, you're destroying my life." Sophia crossed her arms, her face unreadable as she regarded him. "Destroying your life?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "No, Nathan, I'm just giving back what you gave to me." Her tone was calm but sharp, cutting deeper than any shout could. "Don't worry," she added with a faint, bitter smile. "I won't ruin you financially. That would be far too simple. I want you to live with the pain. I want you to feel every little loss, just like I did. I want you to wake up every day and watch everything you built crumble and know it's your fault." Nathan felt the ground shift beneath him. He had always been the one in control, the one shaping the destinies of others. Now he was the target of a cold, calculated revenge. Sophia wasn't trying to destroy him all at once. She was dismantling him piece by piece, forcing him to endure the slow unraveling of his life. Weeks passed, and Sophia continued her silent punishment. Nathan, once confident and commanding, had become a shell of his former self. He wandered through the house like a shadow, desperate for any opportunity to earn a forgiveness he was beginning to realize might never come. Every effort he made to redeem himself seemed to fall flat. He was trapped in a relentless cycle of guilt and pain, a cycle Sophia controlled with chilling precision. But the worst was still to come. One night, as Nathan sat slumped on the couch, exhausted and broken, Sophia approached him. There was a coldness in her expression that he had never seen before. She stood over him, her voice calm but laced with an edge that made him flinch. "Nathan," she began, "you took something from me that I can never get back." Her words hung heavy in the air, each one like a blow. "Now," she continued, "I'm returning the favor, and you will live with that for the rest of your life." With those words, she turned and walked away, leaving Nathan speechless. She didn't need to say anything more. The punishment was already in motion, and he knew in that moment that he would never be the same. The days that followed were unbearable. Nathan felt as though he was trapped in a maze of guilt and despair. Sophia had succeeded in showing him what it was like to lose control completely. The man who once thrived on power and arrogance was now reduced to a pale reflection of himself. Each attempt he made to reach out to Sophia was met with a cold stare or outright indifference. Her silence was eating him alive, Nathan could no longer sleep. His thoughts were consumed by his mistakes, by the truth of what he had done, and by his desperate need to fix what had been broken. Yet the weight of his past made that path seem nearly impossible. Then something shifted within him. He realized that words alone would never be enough. Apologies, no matter how sincere, held no value. Sophia needed to see real change, genuine transformation. Nathan resolved to do something he had never done before. He would let his actions speak for him. One morning, Nathan woke up with newfound determination. He knew he couldn't simply ask for forgiveness. Sophia needed space to see that he respected her time and emotions. Pressuring her wouldn't bring her closer, it would only drive her further away. But he also knew he couldn't disappear entirely. He needed to show her quietly and consistently that he was still there, committed to change. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, Nathan understood that this wasn't about winning. It was about becoming someone better, someone who could truly make amends. In subtle but meaningful ways, Nathan began paying attention to the little details that made up Sophia's life. He observed her daily routines, her preferences, and the small things that brought her joy. He didn't invade her space or follow her every move, but he mentally cataloged what he noticed. She loved flowers, especially peonies. Her coffee was always strong, with no sugar. These details, once insignificant to him, now became the foundation of his attempts to reconnect. That afternoon, Nathan visited one of the most elegant flower shops in the city and bought a bouquet of fresh, vibrant peonies. He didn't dare give them to Sophia directly. He knew she'd reject them outright. Instead, he left the flowers on the kitchen table, carefully arranged, without a note, simple but heartfelt. When Sophia returned from her walk, she noticed the bouquet. Nathan, lingering out of sight, watched out of the corner of his eye. She paused in front of the flowers. Her expression didn't change, but she reached out, picked one, and held it to her nose to breathe in the fragrance. It was a small gesture, but for Nathan it was a glimmer of hope. She hadn't ignored the gesture entirely. It was a start. In the days that followed, Nathan continued with these quiet acts of care. He started setting the breakfast table early each morning, ensuring her coffee was made exactly the way she liked it. He left without saying a word, giving her space, but letting her know he was paying attention. He placed little things she enjoyed. A favorite book, her preferred snack, within reach, always without forcing a conversation or a meeting. Slowly, he tried to show her that he was changing, that he genuinely wanted to care for her, not as a part of a game, but because he truly meant it. Sophia, however, kept the walls around her firmly in place. She remained distant, the emotional barrier between them still strong. Nathan understood that breaking through it would take time, but he was prepared to wait. He was committed to proving himself, not with words, but with actions, and to doing it on her terms, with the respect she deserved. One particularly cold evening, Nathan noticed Sophia on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, gazing out at the city lights. For a moment he hesitated, unsure if his presence would be welcome. But then, gathering his courage, he prepared a cup of hot tea, just the way she liked it, and stepped outside. "Here," he said softly, extending the cup toward her. "I thought you might like something warm." Sophia didn't respond right away. She took the cup without looking at him, her eyes still focused on the skyline. Nathan stood beside her, silent, not wanting to intrude, but hoping to offer his presence as a gesture of support. The silence between them was heavy, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel unbearable. There was a faint shift in the air, as if something unspoken was beginning to change. Finally, Sophia broke the silence, her voice soft but firm. "Why are you doing this?" Nathan knew this was his chance to speak, but he had to choose his words carefully. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the horizon as he answered. "Because I've realized that talking doesn't mean anything anymore," he said quietly. "My words don't matter. What I did can't be fixed with apologies. But I'm trying to show you that I'm changing. I want to be a better person, not just for you, but because I've finally understood that I need to be." Sophia remained silent, holding the tea in her hands. The cold wind swept past them, but the tension in the air seemed to ease just a little. After a few moments, she finally spoke. Her voice was quieter than Nathan had expected. "You can't change the past," she said simply. Her words weren't an invitation for forgiveness, but they weren't a rejection either. For Nathan, that sliver of acknowledgement was enough to keep him going. "I know," Nathan replied sincerely, "but I can change the future." Sophia looked at him for the first time that night, and Nathan noticed something different in her gaze. The hardness was still there, but beneath it was a flicker of curiosity, a faint glimmer of something that suggested she might want to believe in him. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet. Nathan understood that. But this moment felt pivotal, a chance he couldn't afford to squander. In the days that followed, Nathan kept up with his quiet gestures of care. There was a subtle shift in the air between them. While Sophia still maintained her distance, her rejection wasn't as sharp as before. She accepted the flowers he left for her, drank the tea he prepared, and even allowed brief, superficial conversations during breakfast. The walls between them were beginning to lower, if only slightly. For Nathan, even these small moments felt like victories. The real test came one evening when Nathan was about to leave for a business meeting. He had dressed sharply, preparing to step back into the professional world he had been avoiding. As he adjusted his tie, Sophia entered the room. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet resolve in her voice when she spoke. "Can you cancel your meeting?" she asked, her words soft but firm. Nathan froze, surprised. Sophia had shown no interest in his schedule or his comings and goings since their relationship had fractured. He hesitated briefly, but then nodded, pulling out his phone to cancel the appointment without a second thought. This was the first time in weeks that Sophia seemed open to spending time with him, and he wasn't about to let the opportunity slip away. They sat together on the couch, a respectful distance apart. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the silence between them wasn't suffocating. It carried a sense of tentative peace. Sophia appeared thoughtful, as if she were processing everything that had happened over the past months. Finally, she broke the quiet. "I'm not ready to fully forgive you," she said, her tone honest but not unkind. "But you're showing me something different. I see that you're trying. And maybe that's the beginning of something." Nathan's heart raced at her words. He didn't dare push or rush her. He knew he couldn't afford to. But the fact that she was willing to acknowledge his efforts was enough to keep his hope alive. The night continued quietly, with the two of them talking about trivial things. To Nathan, it was a small yet meaningful victory. He was beginning to rebuild something with patience, brick by brick. Sophia was no longer an untouchable figure, and Nathan resolved never to underestimate her again. Still, a shadow lingered over their interactions. Nathan sensed that Sophia hadn't revealed everything. There was something she was still holding back, and he knew he would have to face it eventually. For now, though, he chose to focus on what he had. A chance to start over. The days following that quiet evening were a mix of tension and hope. For the first time in a long while, Nathan felt like he was making progress. Sophia no longer treated him with the icy coldness of before, but she also didn't fully open up. There was a hesitation in her manner, a kind of waiting that kept him on edge. Nathan dedicated himself to proving he was a changed man. He began canceling work commitments to spend more time at home, ensuring he was present for Sophia without pressuring her or demanding answers. Small gestures continued to define his efforts, making breakfast together, ensuring her favorite tea was ready, and leaving small but meaningful tokens of care around the house. These moments weren't grand declarations but quiet proofs of his sincerity. As Nathan worked tirelessly to show Sophia his transformation, he felt the weight of her unspoken expectations. He knew he was being tested, but he was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. What he didn't know was that something much larger was on the horizon, something that would change everything. Evenings filled with quiet conversations and small talk became part of Nathan and Sophia's routine. Slowly, the ice between them began to thaw. Nathan noticed that Sophia no longer treated him with the same sharp disdain. But despite the progress, a nagging feeling persisted within him. He knew she was keeping something from him. Sophia remained reserved, carefully sidestepping deeper discussions about the past or the future. It was as if she was waiting for the right moment to reveal something important. Nathan couldn't figure out what it was, and the not knowing gnawed at him. One quiet night, rain lightly tapped against the large windows of the penthouse. Nathan observed Sophia from across the room. She was more introspective than usual, her gaze distant, as though she were lost in a world of her own thoughts. He resisted the urge to push her, knowing that rushing her might undo the fragile progress they'd made. But his curiosity burned. What was she hiding? What hadn't she told him? Finally, the silence became unbearable. Nathan took a deep breath, his voice low and cautious. "Sophia," he began, almost fearful of what her response might be. "I know there's something you haven't told me. I can feel it." Sophia, seated on the couch with her hands clasped in her lap, didn't immediately look at him. The seconds stretched unbearably, but Nathan knew he had to be patient. Forcing the issue now could shatter the fragile trust between them. Eventually, she lifted her gaze, and Nathan was struck by the emotions swirling in her eyes, a mix of pain and steely resolve. "You're right, Nathan," she said softly, her voice weighted with emotion. "There's something I've been holding back, something I didn't think I could tell you, until now, but maybe it's time." Nathan felt the air around him grow heavier, as though the weight of the moment was pressing down on his chest. Whatever she was about to reveal, he knew it would change everything. He leaned forward slightly, bracing himself for the words to come but dreading them all the same. "Do you remember the company you destroyed?" Sophia began, her voice firm, but her expression showing deep pain. "The one my father managed?" Nathan nodded cautiously. "You told me about your family, how I destroyed your lives. I know what I did to you was unforgivable." Sophia shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "That's true, you ruined us, but that's not all you destroyed." Nathan's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling with concern. Sophia lowered her eyes, as though trying to summon the strength to say what had been buried inside her for so long. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was pregnant, Nathan." The words hit Nathan like a crushing blow. He blinked, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. "What?" he whispered, stunned. "I was pregnant at the time," Sophia continued, her gaze fixed on the floor. "When we lost everything, when my father was gone, the stress, the pressure of it all, I lost the baby." Nathan felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under him. He could barely breathe as her words sank in. The guilt he had been carrying for weeks now grew into something almost unbearable. He had destroyed more than a company, more than a family. He had destroyed a life. "Sophia," he began, his voice cracking with emotion. He tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. Sophia didn't look up. "You didn't just take my father's life, Nathan. You took a piece of mine too, and you went on, like nothing ever happened." Her words were a blade, slicing through any remaining shred of composure Nathan had. He sat there, unable to speak, as the weight of her pain consumed him. Sophia's revelation wasn't just devastating. It was the final blow that forced him to confront the full gravity of his actions. "I didn't know. I never could have imagined." Nathan stammered, his voice trembling with disbelief. Sophia finally looked at him, and the tears she had been holding back spilled freely down her cheeks. Despite the anguish etched across her face, there was an undeniable strength in her. "No, you didn't know," she said, her voice heavy with hurt and resentment. "Because you never cared to know. You destroyed lives, Nathan, and you never even looked at the people in your way. I lost my baby, and you went on with your life as if nothing had happened." Her words pierced Nathan's heart like knives. He wanted desperately to do something, anything, to fix what he had done. But deep down, he knew that no words or actions could erase what Sophia had endured. I don't have the words," Nathan finally managed, his voice weak and laden with despair. "I know what I did is unforgivable, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But please, Sophia, I would do anything to try and make this right. Anything." Sophia watched him for a long, agonizing moment. The silence between them was suffocating. Yet Nathan didn't dare speak again. He knew nothing he said could bring back what she had lost. All he could hope for was a way to ease even a fraction of the pain she carried. Finally, Sophia took a deep breath, closing her eyes as though bracing herself for a decision. When she opened them again, her expression had shifted. The pain was still there, but something else had surfaced, something Nathan couldn't quite identify. I don't know if I can forgive you, Nathan, she said, her voice honest but tinged with vulnerability. What you did, what happened, it was devastating. She paused, weighing her next words. But I can see that you're trying, and maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that one day I can find a way to move forward, but it won't be easy. It won't be quick. Nathan nodded slowly, feeling an unfamiliar mix of hope and despair. He knew the road ahead would be long and grueling, but Sophia's willingness to consider a different future, no matter how distant, was enough to ignite a small spark of determination within him. I'll do whatever it takes, Nathan responded, his voice steady and resolute. No matter how long it takes, I'll prove to you that I've changed, that I can be someone you trust, someone you can, maybe one day, forgive. Sophia held his gaze for a moment longer. For the first time there was a faint opening in her demeanor. It wasn't forgiveness, nor was it the end of her pain, but it was something. It was a beginning. We'll see, Sophia said with a soft sigh. We'll see if you can. The silence that followed between them was heavy, but no longer unbearable. It was filled with unspoken possibilities. Sophia stood and walked toward the door, leaving Nathan alone on the couch. But this time, the emptiness inside him wasn't the same. He felt the weight of the journey ahead, but also a sliver of hope. In the days that followed Sophia's revelation, Nathan's life was transformed. Every word she had spoken stayed with him, weighing heavily on his mind. The guilt of all the pain he had caused consumed him, but instead of letting it paralyze him, he decided to use it as fuel for change. Nathan no longer wanted to win Sophia's love as part of a challenge. He wanted to become a man worthy of her respect, and the respect of all the people he had hurt through his ruthless ambition. That morning, Nathan made a decision. He would no longer let the past condemn him. Instead, he would confront it head-on and work tirelessly to become better. Not just for Sophia, but for himself and the people he had wronged. The road to redemption was daunting, but Nathan was ready to take the first step. Nathan knew he had to start over, and the first step was repairing as much of the damage he had caused as possible. His actions would prove to Sophia that his transformation was real. He began by tracking down families whose lives had been shattered by his ruthless business dealings. His first visit was to the family of an old competitor, someone whose business he had crushed years ago. Arriving unannounced, Nathan stood on the doorstep of a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, a far cry from the luxury he was accustomed to. The man who answered the door was a stranger to Nathan, but the pain in his eyes felt all too familiar. "I'm Nathan Carter," he said, his voice filled with a sincerity he hardly recognized in himself. "I'm here to apologize." The man stared at him for a long moment, disbelief etched across his face. "Apologize?" he said, laughing bitterly. "What's that going to change now?" "I know I can't change the past," Nathan replied, his tone steady but earnest, "but I can try to help rebuild the future. I'm here to offer compensation, to help repair the damage I caused." Over the next few weeks, Nathan's journey of redemption continued. He knocked on doors, met with families, and offered not just financial compensation, but his time and genuine effort. He sought to understand the depth of his actions and their impact. Nathan donated significant sums to small businesses that had been hurt by his corporate maneuvers, setting up recovery programs to help struggling entrepreneurs rebuild. He poured his energy into making amends, not out of obligation, but out of a growing understanding of the harm he had inflicted. Sophia observed all of this from a distance. At first, she remained cautious, watching Nathan's every move with skepticism. She had heard promises before, and forgiveness would not come easily. But as days turned into weeks, Sophia began to see something she hadn't expected. Nathan's transformation was real. His words were no longer empty gestures. They were backed by actions that spoke volumes. For the first time, Sophia felt a flicker of something new, a sense of respect for the man Nathan was becoming. One evening, Sophia stood on the balcony, her eyes fixed on the sprawling city lights. Nathan quietly approached her, fresh from another visit to a family he had wronged. His expression was different now, calmer, more resolute. "How was it today?" Sophia asked without turning, her gaze still on the horizon. Nathan sighed, a deep exhale that carried months of effort and regret. "Tough," he admitted, his voice low, "but necessary. Every conversation, every apology, It's a step, not just toward being a better person for you, but for me too. Sophia finally turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. There was something different in her gaze as well. The hardness, the anger she had carried for so long seemed to have softened. In that moment, she saw a man who was no longer defined by arrogance and selfish ambition. He was someone fighting to be different, someone willing to fight for them. "I can see that," Sophia said, her voice soft but steady. "And I want you to know that I'm ready to try. Maybe it's time we leave the past behind and build something new." Nathan felt a wave of relief he hadn't even realized he was waiting for. Her words meant more than he could have imagined. Sophia was willing to give them a chance, not as a couple forced together by circumstance, but as two people ready to start fresh. They shared moments of laughter and connection, and slowly love began to blossom in ways neither Nathan nor Sophia had expected. They were no longer two distant individuals trapped in a transactional marriage. Instead, they were two people rediscovering each other in a genuine, heartfelt way. One evening, as the 6-month period drew to a close, Nathan prepared a special dinner. He knew this night would be pivotal. They had come so far, and he couldn't bear the thought of their journey ending there. "Sophia," he said during dinner, his voice unsteady with a nervousness he hadn't expected. "I know our agreement is almost over, but I don't want this to end. I don't want us to end. I've fallen in love with you, Sophia, truly, and I want us to continue, but this time as a real couple. No games, no conditions." Sophia looked at him, her heart warming at the sincerity in his words. She hadn't expected him to speak with such vulnerability. As she searched her own feelings, she realized she had fallen for him too. Something that had quietly grown over the past few weeks. "I love you too, Nathan," she said, her voice soft but firm. "And I want to try. I want to build something real with you, but this time as equals, as partners." The moment was pure happiness for both of them. They had overcome obstacles that once seemed insurmountable. Now, they were ready to move forward together. Months later, Sophia began to notice changes in her body. Nausea in the mornings, a feeling of exhaustion she couldn't shake. After a doctor's visit, she received confirmation she was pregnant. When Sophia told Nathan, his reaction was one of pure, unfiltered joy. He embraced her, laughing and crying all at once. All the pain and heartache they had endured now felt like it had led them to this moment of renewal. "We're ready for this," Nathan said, his voice steady with determination. "A new life, a fresh start. And I want to do this the right way, Sophia." She looked at him curiously. "I want to marry you again," he continued, his tone full of conviction. "But this time, for real. Not because of a bet. Not for any reason other than the fact that I love you and want to spend the rest of my life with you." Sophia smiled, tears of joy mingling with his. "I want that too, Nathan," she said. "This time, it'll be real. A true beginning." Their new wedding was an intimate celebration, shared with only a few close friends and family. There was no superficial glamour, no rush dictated by business deals or bets, just Nathan and Sophia, united by true love and ready to face the future together. Nathan knew he still had much to prove, not just to Sophia, but also to himself and to the families he had wronged in the past. But now he had something to fight for, a new life alongside the woman he loved and the child they were expecting. This time, Nathan was determined to be the man Sophia deserved and the father their child would need. As they danced slowly at the end of the ceremony, Sophia rested her head on Nathan's chest and whispered, "Who would have thought it all started with a bet?" Nathan smiled, holding her close. "Who would have thought it'd be the best bet I ever made?" With a future full of love, redemption, and hope, they were ready to embrace the next chapter of their lives together. Bookmark, do you think? Did Sophia make the right choice in forgiving and marrying Nathan? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartfelt narratives. Thank you for being part of this journey.